It is day 21. It is week 6 of evidence in the Karen Reed case. We have just had a 5-day break from court. They were dark on Thursday. They were dark Friday for the holiday, Saturday, Sunday for the weekend, Monday for Memorial Day. It is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025, week 6, day 21. They came into court this morning, went to sidebar, then went on a break, then came back with a voir dire outside the presence of the jury briefly of Mr./Dr. Welcher from Aperture, the company that Burgess is from. This might be the Commonwealth's last witness. I actually suspect that it is. This is the accident reconstructionist for the Commonwealth. And unless he was freaking heated during this voir dire, he says that Welcher has updated his slides in the last few days. He said that he didn't update those slides based on a conversation with Burgess, but based on Burgess's report, and said verbatim, the updated slides bring the trigger event 1162-2, quote, closer in time to Ian Whiffin's last point of contact. Well, we knew that's where the Commonwealth was going with that when we saw the updates from Burgess saying that trigger event must have happened at a different time. And this expert said the same thing that Burgess said. They were still within those 60-second variants that we allowed for. This just narrows the time. It brings it closer in time. It narrows down that 60-second variance. And then he asked, who did you talk to about it? Well, I talked to Mr. Brennan. And he said I needed to take out this slide because that slide had testimony that I couldn't include in a slide. So Brennan suggested changes to the PowerPoint. You know what Brennan should have done? He should have sent it to the defense and said, I think this slide needs to be redacted out, and let the defense go from there. But no, they just took it out of the presentation and gave an updated presentation, apparently, to the defense, over the weekend. And then they asked Welcher if he knew about the issues with Burgess's CV. And he said, unfortunately, I've been inundated with emails, and the emails look like professional emails. And then or business emails, and then I start reading them, and it's about Burgess, and I stop reading them because the court said I couldn't, which means there has been some communication from Brennan or someone on the prosecution team to this witness saying, you cannot watch testimony, and stuff happened with Burgess, and you cannot talk to anyone about it. But I don't doubt that he has been inundated by emails. So now everyone on the internet that inundated this man with emails, he's not going to be caught by surprise. Why? Because everybody it's not y'all. The Lawnards know. Because the internet inundated him with emails. So is there an element of surprise? No. He wasn't supposed to be told about that. He wouldn't or shouldn't have known about it, except that the internet just interneted. I would rather have seen him caught by surprise. Wouldn't you? I would rather Alessi have gotten to do that on cross. But no, he got a fuck ton of emails. And there are times you just can't ignore the inundated emails. Why? Because his business website has his info on it. But now he knows. So everybody who's like, meh, and I don't doubt it. I don't doubt he probably got hundreds, if not thousands of emails. So well done, everybody. You gave this witness a heads up that he shouldn't have had. And if he did have the heads up, you gave him a way to explain it that doesn't involve the prosecution. That's annoying. But what can one do?
Have you ever heard the term variance before?
I have.
What do you understand that to be?
That means differences from the answer.
What?
Sorry, differences from what?
From typically the correct answer. Like meaning that
what?
A given data.
Oh, you've walked into a whole nother line of questioning and cross-examination. Variance. Brennan is asking him to explain variance, and he says it's the variance from the correct answer. Oh, fuck. This is going to come back round.
So similarly, using this information to then try to tie it back to the cell phone data to make sure we have the real-time information. Again, this was written back in January before I got the additional information. So what you can see is, I'll zoom in. Again, we're now talking about trigger 1162.2. We know that that's 18 minutes that the vehicle has been on, 18 minutes, 57 seconds, 19 minutes, 2 seconds.
Oh my God. Can you not read your slide?
This is the range. Again,
maybe it's because there's so much on it. He's like, excuse me, this, let me back up this. If your slide's confusing for you, we're at lunch on day 21 of the Karen Reed case, and Dr. Welcher is on the stand. The questioning so far has been disjointed for me. It's been convoluted, and I should have known what we were in for when I couldn't even track this expert's educational path. Because even trying to track the expert's educational path was confusing. And it's the questioning for the most part. But there are times when Brennan will ask a question and the witness gives very short answers. Why? It seems to be that the style of Brennan's questions, being almost a more leading style, have truncated the answers. So there's no explanation. And that has led to some of the most confusing PowerPoint slides I think I've ever seen. And a lot of data and not a lot of explanation. And then because each slide is so jam-packed with stuff on it, in court they're zooming in so you can't see the totality of the slides. So you're getting little segments of things that are on a spreadsheet. But generally with a spreadsheet, you need all the information. And so you're getting snippets of it. This is the Commonwealth's accident reconstruction expert and biomedical engineer. And so far, the way the testimony is being elicited for me is clunky, confusing, and difficult to follow. They are jumping back and forth between slides. They are trying to correlate points of data that are getting lost in the mix because there's no overall explanation for it. And they spent a ton of time trying to correlate the 3-point turn and then making a diagram of it. So you could see the car make a 3-point turn. Here's what we know. The text stream data from the Lexus gathers informations around a trigger event. So whatever the trigger event threshold is, the Lexus will then record 5 seconds before and 5 seconds after. So that is a snippet of a 10-second window that you have around the trigger event. And this witness said in the middle of everything that the trigger event was caused for the 3-point turn because the car went into reverse and then the accelerator being at more than 30%. And so the action of reversing and then accelerating more than 30% is what seemed to cause those trigger events for the 3-point turn and for the backing event. Trigger event 1162.1 and 1162.2. Those trigger events are recorded in real time, counting up. So from the time the Lexus gets turned on with the button push, there's a 3-second delay when the infotainment system goes on. And from there, the text stream data counts up in seconds. He correlated those seconds to minutes. So when we are looking at the backing event after the 3-point turn, that happened a bit more than 19 minutes after the car was turned on in that key cycle. We also heard that from the car's quote unquote black box, there were no collision events recorded on the vehicle. I don't think they've even asked the date yet of these events. They've just jumped into all of it. But we saw the 3-point turn, and the reason they are going to be able to connect the 3-point turn clearly for me to the backing event. The backing event happens 8 minutes after the 3-point turn. There is going to be a lot of disagreement over what time that correlates to in John O'Keefe's phone. That's a very fair fight. But the data is pretty clear for me that the 3-point turn and the backing event happened within 8 minutes of each other. And Karen Reed gave an interview talking about that 3-point turn. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of argument over the 3-point turn and when it happened, and over the backing event and when it happened, because of Karen Reed's interview. Karen Reed's interview says, John said we missed Fairview. I made a 3-point turn here. And then 8 minutes later, the backing event happened. Now, if that backing event caused anything is greatly in dispute, but the car backed up. And what we heard for the first time today is that there is evidence in that text stream data that shows that the tires were spinning. It has been asked a lot. I don't think we heard about it at all the first trial. But now we are hearing that there is evidence in the text stream data that the tires on the Lexus SUV were spinning and slipping. And we have continued to hear throughout this witness's testimony that there is evidence that the tires were slipping, so that the tire speed data is not accurate. You also need the accelerometer data. You also need the data from the steering wheel, and you also need the distance traveled. When we get into all of that data, and we're not even done with it yet, the Commonwealth was just trying to correlate the time of the backing event to the time on John O'Keefe's phone and when John O'Keefe's phone locked. That is where they are in testimony, trying to show the backing event and the locking event on John O'Keefe's phone. They had briefly talked about how much distance the Lexus had traveled. It was so clunky and hard to follow. But what they said with the backing event is that in that trigger event, the Lexus drove forward and they gave a distance, and then drove backwards and they gave the distance. And then they said the total distance traveled by the Lexus, including the forward movement and the backing up movement, was 87 feet total. But that's only during the event. The Lexus would have traveled before that and after that event. Have we gotten to speed? No, not clearly. But we've gotten to 87 feet total travel, but that includes at least 34 feet forward and up to 53 feet backwards, they say. They are still correlating time of the backing event. There is a lot more that we have to see from this witness, and I don't know if we're going to get done with direct today. I don't know if we're going to get done with direct today at all.
One final question. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty the relative time this backing maneuver occurred with the defendant's Lexus that you just spoke about?
Yes.
And could you share with the jury your opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty?
Sure. It matches the window of the cell phone data for Mr. O'Keefe that puts it in front of 34 Fairview. So the backing event occurred somewhere between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12.
I've never seen an expert coming to give an opinion of a highly relevant and contended point in a case, and instead of saying to the jury, yes, answer, they are saying, yes, answer. I have Do you know your opinions?
So, for example, if you get hit and knocked off balance or clipped and knocked off balance, you can take additional steps. That'll affect how far your body travels. If you have 1 foot on the ground versus the other foot on the ground, affects how the body rotates. If your arm is at 90 degrees or 85 degrees, will affect the kinematics. We attempted to model different possibilities, and we're getting results that were all over the map. Small changes in the pedestrian position.
It keeps getting worse.
Give you huge change in the output. And so from the text stream data, we don't know exactly when in the text stream data he was hit.
What?
So we don't even know the exact impact speed.
What?
In most pedestrian reconstructions, you typically have a point where the impact occurred, like where the person was, like in the crosswalk, for example, and they get hit and their tire leaves a rubber scrub. That's called the area of impact or point of impact. You then can look at how far they were thrown and using some laws of physics, calculate how fast the car had to be going. Well, we don't have that in this case. We don't know exactly where Mr. O'Keefe was on the roadway when this happened. Sorry, I'm about to go to the next slide. Oh.
Without having an exact point of impact,
What?
an exact speed, or an exact...
So you're telling me that you, as an expert, bought a Lexus, shipped it across the country, or at least halfway across the country, 3D modeled everything, ran a bunch of scans and lasers and whatever. And what you can sit here in court and tell us for certain is that the amount of damage to Karen Reed's taillight didn't come from John O'Keefe's Chevy. That's what you're certain of. That's what you're certain of. But you just went through an entire litany of something could have happened, but we can't tell you what? I mean, I'm not shocked that that's the truth, that everybody's like, we don't know what happened. I'm not shocked that that's the truth. I'm shocked that the Commonwealth decided that on this expert, we're going to do this retrial with an expert that said it could be a lot of things. It could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. You're not the defense. The Commonwealth needs to say, it is this. They have the burden of proof. So they have to prove how this happened. We know something happened to John O'Keefe. The Commonwealth has to prove what happened and who. Did they forget what the burden is? Because I think this witness has brought doubt to the table. More. At the end of day 21, beginning of week 6 of the Karen Reed retrial, we have the Commonwealth's accident reconstruction expert on the stand. And we ended the day with the expert being asked if he had an opinion about whether or not Karen Reed's Lexus struck John O'Keefe. And at the end of that testimony, the expert said, yes, that is what happened. And there was a very swift and frustrated objection from attorney Alessi, and then a sidebar of some length, and then the jury was excused, and then the witness was excused, well, out of the courtroom. And then the attorneys were allowed to argue on that point about whether or not the expert was testifying to the ultimate issue of whether or not there was a collision. And attorney Brennan argued, well, that's not the ultimate issue of this case. The ultimate issue of this case is not whether there was a collision. Brennan said that much is obvious. The ultimate issue of this case is whether there's mens rea for it to be a second-degree murder or for it to be a manslaughter. That is how Brennan sees the ultimate issue in this case. Attorney Alessi said, Your Honor, a collision is the ultimate issue in this case. The defense is arguing there was no collision and is bringing in experts to say that there was no collision, which Brennan used to say, see, they're going to bring in experts to testify about the ultimate issue that there was no collision. We are allowed to bring in experts to talk about the ultimate issue of whether there is a collision. How John O'Keefe died is a central issue to this case. The court is taking it under advisement and will take it up tomorrow before the jury is back. But both sides were arguing where we go with this expert next, because witness number 38, I think maybe the Commonwealth's last expert, which means we haven't seen their dog expert, who's probably going to be a rebuttal witness, so that makes sense. Witness 38, possibly the last witness, and I think maybe probably the last witness for the Commonwealth. And we have not gotten through all his opinions yet, but his opinion is that based on the totality of what he reviewed, Karen Reed's Lexus struck John O'Keefe. And I don't even know how we got there, because what we saw were videos with paint And he was reading off of a list with like his head under the microphone about the things he reviewed. And then when asked, didn't give his opinion clearly until he got to, that is what happened. Which again, experts can testify to if they have an opinion. And those opinions are normally based on things like, do you have an opinion on whether John O'Keefe's injuries were consistent with being struck by a car? Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the damage to the Lexus SUV is consistent with a pedestrian strike? Do you have an opinion, this? And Brennan's like, no, I get to ask, do you have an opinion about whether the Lexus struck John O'Keefe? And what is that opinion based on? And even if the court allows that in, and we will see in the morning, I think she probably will, the expert cannot testify that is what happened. And here's what is kind of staggering to me with this expert, is that in all the testimony we saw today, we went through a substantial amount of testimony where this expert said, we don't know where in the text stream data this occurred. We don't know where in the road John O'Keefe was when this occurred. We don't know how exactly this occurred because there's too many factors and we don't have enough information. So when you see an expert building their opinion, normally you see expert go with fact 1, fact 2, fact 3, fact 4, therefore opinion. This expert went with, I don't know, maybe this, we don't have enough information, we're not sure about this, opinion, this is what happened. How did you get there? I'm still not sure how this expert got there. How did the taillight get damaged? Because he didn't testify about it. How was the taillight damaged? How did it break? How much force does it take to break a taillight like that? And at the beginning of direct, at one point, this witness said, this is a 6,000-pound vehicle. And John O'Keefe weighed 216 pounds. It's a 6,000-pound car. Okay. So how did John O'Keefe break the 6,000-pound car without breaking more of John O'Keefe then? What? And he's like, well, there was, his opinion was there was glass at the scene? How did it happen? Well, his arm could have been like this. How do you make the scientific jump from it could have been this, it could have been this, it could have been this, it could have been that, and then this is what happened? What I never heard this expert say is that this caused this, that caused this. We know this because of these other things. What we heard a lot of was, well, I was trying to correlate these things together. And a lot of the testimony sounded more like he was trying to fit facts together than start with what happened and work out from there. I'm trying to fit facts together. Okay. But that's not your job. Your job is to try to tell us how it happened. You're a reconstructionist. How can you reconstruct this accident? And on direct examination, the answer was, I can't reconstruct this accident because every time we moved one little thing, there were too many variables. And the direct quote from this witness was, the results were all over the map. So if the results were all over the map, how is your ultimate conclusion that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car? Or that Karen Reed's Lexus hit John O'Keefe? How? How is that the opinion? When so much of the testimony was, we don't have enough information. We don't have enough information for this. The job is not to correlate two things. The job is to reconstruct it. And he said in the reconstructions, it was all over the map. It was some of the most tedious and disorganized expert testimony I have ever seen. And I don't know if that was the PowerPoint or the questioning or the witness. I will probably have way more thoughts tomorrow because I'm still buffering. But there was a substantial amount of time spent overlaying how Karen Reed's car hit John O'Keefe's car at One Meadows Ave when it was backing out. If anything was proven, it was that Karen Reed's car hit John O'Keefe's car at One Meadows Ave at 5 a.m. when they were backing out, but everybody already knew that because you can just see it on the video. They did whole 3D modeling on it. What else did they spend a ton of time on? Well, they spent a ton of time on the 3-point turn and correlating the clock together, correlating John O'Keefe's time on his phone to the time on the Lexus. We had a whole nother witness do that too, witness Burgess. I wonder if the Commonwealth is worried, and this is purely my speculation. This is purely my wondering. It's my speculation sound. Purely my wondering. Is it because the Commonwealth wanted the jury to hear it from another witness, not Burgess, about the time, knitting together the time from the Lexus and John O'Keefe's phone? We know from Karen Reed's witness interviews that they did a 3-point turn. We've kind of jumped over anyone talking about how they correlated the text stream data the same day, but they did talk about the mileage substantially and the mileage matching, which I think helps. Does it answer the ultimate question? No, but I think it helps. I think they did a good job at tying together the 3-point turn and tying together a backing event. The car backed up. And it seemed like the car backed up at quite some speed. But there was also quite a bit of testimony about when the car was backing up, that there was evidence of the tires slipping. We didn't hear a lot about that prior to today. Today is the first time we heard about the tires slipping on the car and showing a chart where the car is backing up. There's evidence of the tires slipping and then the car's moving in reverse. And then we heard that the car was moving in reverse up to 24 miles an hour. But we also heard this expert say, but we don't know where in the text stream data John O'Keefe was hit. We don't know a point of impact. We don't know at what speed he was hit. We don't know where he was hit. We don't. That makes it difficult. I do think they did a good job correlating the text stream data from the 3-point turn with Karen Reed's interview and the backing up happening about 8 minutes later. They spent a ton of time on that and a ton of time on overlaying Karen Reed backing out of the driveway. And then it was from there to, which means he was hit by a car. I don't know how we made that last jump. We had the witness using himself as a crash test dummy with paint on his arm, which is why the defense made a motion to keep this witness out. And then it just moved into, yeah, it's my opinion that the SUV hit John O'Keefe. It's notable to me how long they spent with some of the other information and how quickly they went to, and then John O'Keefe was hit by the car. But where did they break the steps down to get to that conclusion? Because it was a lot of, well, we don't know. I think there's a lot there for the defense to argue. I am stunned that this expert said that is what happened. I am just still, it was just such clunky and bad testimony. And there were parts of it at the beginning where they made good points. And then all of the wheels came off. And I think ultimately this expert gave a lot to the defense to argue, but did correlate that the Lexus made a 3-point turn and backed up. Okay. But how did the rest of everything happen? Taking that as true, if we are taking that as true, how did everything else happen? And where's the text stream data that shows the backing up out of the driveway? And how did the taillight get broken? And how did the taillight get broken without more injuries? What I think we got from this expert was there's too many factors to have an answer, which is consistent with what the coroner said. It's not consistent with a murder trial, but it is consistent with the coroner. That was my takeaway from the middle of this witness. We don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. That was my takeaway. But I've watched this trial once before. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the Law Nerd app at lawnerdapp.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Law Nerd.